All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and today things are going to get a little fiery.
A little fiery, you could say that.
That's right, we're going all in on the Targaryens with George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood.
You know, it's interesting because Fire and Blood isn't exactly your typical novel. It's more like,
That's like a history book, right?
exactly. It's like a history book, but written from the perspective of a master living in the world of Westeros.
So we're getting their take on all the juicy details, all the Targaryen drama.
Exactly. And you know, there's a lot of it.
Oh, I bet. And we've got excerpts from summaries and analyses, so we're going to walk through the entire Targaryen saga.
From the very beginning.
From Aegon's conquest.
Yeah.
All the way to the reign of Aegon III.
It's quite a journey.
Oh, I'm sure it is. So shall we get started then?
Let's dive in.
All right. Chapter 1, Aegon's Conquest. Really throws us right into the action, doesn't it?
It does. It starts with Aegon Targaryen landing in Westeros with his two, well,
Sister wife.
yes, his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, and of course, their dragons.
Can't forget the dragons.
Never forget the dragons. They're kind of a big deal in this whole story. And right away, you see those signature Targaryen traits.
Like what?
Ambition, power, and of course, those magnificent dragons, all coming together. Aegon doesn't just want to rule a kingdom, he wants to forge a whole new one.
I mean, he did offer them a choice, right? Bend the knee or face the dragon fire.
Well, that's true. He did offer them a choice. But let's be real. How much of a choice is that when you've got a dragon breathing down your neck?
Yeah, not much.
It was a very effective tactic, though. 6 of the 7 kingdoms ended up submitting to Aegon's rule.
Some more dramatically than others. I mean, Harrenhal, it didn't just bend the knee. It pretty much went up in smoke.
All thanks to Aegon's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread.
Yeah, talk about sending a message.
That's one way to make a statement. Though not everyone was so keen on testing the dragon fire, Torrhen Stark, the king in the north, decided to take a more, let's say, pragmatic approach.
He bent the knee, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He bent the knee and spared his people from, well, you know.
From becoming barbecue.
Yes, precisely. He ensured the survival of his house, which, in the long run, was probably the wisest move.
But then there's Dorne. They weren't so quick to bow down.
No, they weren't. They fiercely resisted Aegon's conquest, and they paid a heavy price for it. Rhaenys and her dragon, Meraxes, met their end in Dorne.
So even with dragons, conquering a kingdom isn't exactly a walk in the park, huh?
Not at all. Dorne's resistance showed that even with overwhelming power, true independence can be a formidable force.
So Aegon builds his dynasty, sits on the Iron Throne, but of course the drama doesn't end there, right?
Oh, not even close.
2, the Sons of the Dragon, takes us right into the reigns of Aenys and Maegor.
And things get, well, complicated.
Complicated is one way to put it. Aenys and Maegor, they were quite different, weren't they?
Like night and day. Aenys, the elder, was seen as weak and indecisive, while Maegor, his younger half-brother, was, well, let's just say the nickname Maegor the Cruel kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound like a guy you want to invite over for dinner.
Not unless you enjoy being terrified. His reign was a dark period, marked by violence and brutality.
And a lot of that was directed at the faith of the Seven, right?
Exactly. They strongly opposed the Targaryen custom of polygamy.
So we've got a clash of cultures here. The Valyrian traditions bumping heads with the dominant religion of Westeros.
And Maegor was not one for compromise.
No, I don't think compromise was in his vocabulary.
His response was swift and brutal, further alienating him from the people he was supposed to be ruling.
So Aegon's successors, they had their work cut out for them, dealing with their own personal conflicts and all this political turmoil.
It was a challenging time, to say the least.
But then comes Chapter 3, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Finally, a little bit of a break from the chaos, right?
Finally, a breath of fresh air. Jaehaerys VI, also known as Jaehaerys the Conciliator, was a stark contrast to his predecessors.
So not just a king, but a peacemaker.
Exactly. He ushered in a period of peace and prosperity, a golden age for Westeros, and a lot of that was thanks to his beloved wife, good Queen Alysanne.
They seem to be a pretty powerful duo.
They were. Together they focused on uniting the realm. Jaehaerys implemented legal reforms, strengthened infrastructure, and even managed to make peace with Dorne.
He made peace with Dorne. That's impressive. No other Targaryen ruler had been able to do that.
It was a remarkable achievement. His reign was a turning point for the Targaryens, shifting away from conquest and towards consolidation.
So after all that turmoil, Jaehaerys and Alysanne really brought some much-needed stability to the realm.
They did. Their long and prosperous reign set the stage for what many consider the height of Targaryen power.
But as we know with any dynasty, even in times of peace, Seeds of future conflict are often sown.
That's the nature of power.
Which brings us to Chapter 4, Heirs of the Dragon. This sets the stage for the infamous Dance of the Dragons.
A conflict that would tear the realm apart.
And it all started with the succession crisis, right?
Right. King Viserys I had named his daughter, Rhaenyra, as his heir, but then he remarried and had sons, and suddenly the question of who would inherit the Iron Throne became a powder keg.
Wait, so a daughter could inherit the throne. Was that, like, normal for Westeros?
It was unprecedented, and it created a huge rift in the court. Some supported Rhaenyra's claim, while others favored the traditional line of succession, supporting his eldest son, Aegon.
So even with Jaehaerys' efforts to bring peace, those old tensions, those questions of power and lineage, were still simmering beneath the surface.
Like a dragon waiting for the right moment to unleash its fury.
Okay, so we've got a brewing succession crisis, simmering resentment, and a whole lot of dragon fire waiting to erupt.
Then erupt, it will.
Sounds like things are about to get really interesting.
Oh, you have no idea.
All right, listeners, we're about to dive into the heart of the dragon's den. But first, we need to take a quick break.
When we come back, we'll explore the fiery chaos of the Dance of the Dragons and the fallout that shaped the future of Westeros. Stay tuned.
All right, so we're back and ready to delve into Chapter 5, The Dying of the Dragons.
Okay, I'm going to guess that this isn't just a cute name for a children's book. Definitely not. This chapter throws us headfirst into the Dance of the Dragons.
And I'm assuming this dance involves a lot more fire than your average waltz.
You could say that. It's a full-blown civil war with Rhaenyra and her half-brother, Aegon II, both fighting for the Iron Throne.
So it's not just a family squabble. The whole kingdom gets dragged into this mess.
Oh yeah, the entire realm is divided, with supporters of Rhaenyra, the Blacks, clashing with those backing Aegon, the Greens.
Blacks and greens, huh? Sounds more like a sporting event than a war.
Well, it was anything but a game. Noble houses had to choose sides, old grudges were reignited, political ambition soared, and even matters of personal honor came into play.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And of course, let's not forget the dragons.
Oh yeah, the dragons. They were kind of important, weren't they?
They were the ultimate weapons in this war, unleashing fire and fury across the land. We see epic battles in the skies, like the one between Rhaenys Targaryen and Aegon II.
Rhaenys, the queen who never was, she really took to the skies for her niece.
She did. But sadly, she and her dragon, Meleys, met their end in that battle.
It's a reminder that even with a dragon on your side, there are no guarantees in war.
That's right. And Rhaenys' death was a huge blow to Rhaenyra's forces.
And then there's Jacaerys Valerian, Rhaenyra's son. He flies north to try and secure alliance.
A dangerous mission.
And a fatal one.
Huh.
He also meets his end in battle.
The Dance of the Dragons was a brutal conflict, with each side suffering devastating losses.
But amidst all that chaos and bloodshed, there were still moments of courage and sacrifice.
And even love. It's the human stories woven into this grand conflict that make it all the more poignant.
It's hard to believe things could get even worse. But then Rhaenyra actually manages to capture King's Landing.
For a brief moment, it seems like she might actually win.
But knowing Martin, I'm guessing it's not that simple.
You know your Martin well. Her triumph is short-lived. King's Landing, already ravaged by war, descends into utter chaos, and Rhaenyra is forced to flee.
A tragic fall from grace for someone who fought so hard for her crown.
And then, things take an even darker turn. Rhaenyra is captured by her half-brother, and
Oh no, don't tell me.
she meets a horrific end, devoured by Aegon II's dragon, Sunfire.
You've got to be kidding me. Devoured by a dragon.
It's a brutal and gruesome scene, and it really speaks to the escalating violence and the depth of hatred fueling this war.
So even in victory, Aegon II shows just how ruthless he can be.
He does. But the story's not over yet. Chapter 6, The Hour of the Wolf, brings a new player into the game.
Who's that?
Cregan Stark, the Lord of Winterfell, marches south with his army.
The North remembers, huh?
They do. And Cregan Stark is determined to bring some justice to the chaos that's engulfed the realm.
So what happens?
Well, he arrives in King's Landing and demands accountability for the atrocities committed during the war. And with Aegon II mysteriously dead, poisoned by his own men, the path is clear for Rhaenyra's son to ascend the throne.
So after all that bloodshed and turmoil, Aegon III becomes king.
He does. But he inherits a kingdom shattered by war, and he's just a boy haunted by the horrors he's witnessed.
Not exactly an enviable position to be in.
No, not at all. And his reign, covered in Chapter 7, Under the Regents, is a time of healing and rebuilding. It's also a time of great change for the dragons themselves.
Wait, what happened to the dragons? Weren't they kind of a big deal in this whole story?
They were, but sadly, the dragons that survived the dance were sickly and started dying off one by one.
What? Why?
The exact reasons are debated, even within the world of Fire and Blood. Some maesters blame the war itself, while others point to the practice of keeping them confined in the dragon pit.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? These magnificent creatures, once symbols of Targaryen power, end up fading away.
It is, and by the end of Aegon III's reign, the dragons are all but extinct.
It's like the fire that fueled the Targaryen dynasty is slowly burning out.
A fitting image for a dynasty that rose to such heights and then fell so dramatically.
So we've seen the rise and fall of the Targaryens, the triumphs and the tragedies, the dragons soaring and then vanishing from the skies. It's an incredible story, packed with intrigue and drama.
Fire and Blood really captures it all with such depth and complexity.
We've covered a lot of ground, from Aegon's conquest to the Dance of the Dragons and the aftermath. Before we wrap up, I want to take a closer look at some of the details, the things that might not make it into a history book. We've been talking about wars and betrayals and all that. But what about the regular folks just living their lives during all this? Like, what was that like? Did the excerpts give any insight into that?
Well, one thing that I found fascinating was the story of Mushroom the Court Fool.
A court fool.
Yeah, his accounts offer a really unique perspective on the Targaryens. A lot of gossip and intrigue, of course.
I bet. So you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's still valuable because it gives us a glimpse into the personalities and motivations of these larger-than-life figures.
So it's like getting a behind-the-scenes look at the Targaryen dynasty.
Exactly. And speaking of behind the scenes, what about the dragons themselves? They're practically characters in this whole saga, aren't they?
They are. What more can you tell us about them?
Well, for one thing, they weren't just weapons, you know? They were living creatures, each with their own unique personality.
Really? So it's not just like generic dragon number 1 and generic dragon number 2?
No, not at all. For instance, Balerion the Black Dread, Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, was known for his immense size and ferocity.
That sounds terrifying.
He was. And then you have Caraxes, Daemon Targaryen's dragon, who is described as lean and quick, like a red terror in the sky.
It's amazing to think that these creatures actually roamed the skies of Westeros. But then, as you said, they just died out. Do we know why that happened? Was it the war or something else?
Well, the exact reasons are still debated even within the world of Fire and Blood. Some maesters believe the war took too heavy a toll.
Makes sense.
But others point to the practice of keeping them confined in the dragon pit.
So maybe they just weren't meant to be caged.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
It's a mystery that adds another layer to this whole fascinating history.
It really does make you wonder if the Targaryens were better off without the dragons in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all that power was just too much for them to handle.
That's a great question. Would their reign have been more stable? Would they have lasted longer? Or were they always destined to rise and fall like they did?
Those are some questions to ponder for sure.
Definitely. And Fire and Blood really makes you think about the nature of power and legacy, and of course the enduring fascination with dragons.
Well, there you have it, folks. From Aegon's conquest to the Dance of the Dragons and the decline of the Targaryen dynasty, we've explored one heck of a story.
A story filled with ambition, power, and of course those magnificent dragons.
It's a story that really gets you thinking and leaves you wanting more. So what do you think? Are the Targaryens heroes or villains? Conquerors or tyrants?
It's up to you to decide.
That's right. We encourage you to check out Fire and Blood for yourselves and delve into this fascinating history. And hey, maybe you'll uncover even more secrets hidden within its pages. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.